Hey there, viewers. Let me ask you this. If you were backed into a corner with nowhere to hide, would you reveal everything or take your secrets to the grave? Drop your thoughts in the comments because today we're diving into the shocking confessions made by Diddy's former associates during secret interrogations. And trust me, what they exposed changes everything. Chapter 1. When the doors slam shut. In prison, you learn fast. Everything means something. Every glance, every whisper, every sudden lockdown. And that night, something wasn't right. It started without warning. 1 minute, I'm sitting on my bunk, counting down the hours like always. Next thing I know, the alarms are blaring, and the whole block is on lockdown. No movement, no showers, no phone calls. Just cold steel and silence. Now I've been through my share of lockdowns, fights, shakedowns, even a couple of stabbings. But this one, it felt different. The air was heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. And when the guards moved through, they weren't their usual cocky selves. They were quiet, tense, like they were waiting for something to blow. Guys around me were cracking jokes, pretending not to care. That's what you do in here. Act like nothing gets to you. But I've been down too long to play dumb. When the system locks you down this tight, someone's in trouble, someone important. And I had a pretty good idea who. Diddy. Yeah, that Diddy. The man who seemed untouchable on the outside. I mean, people like him, they don't end up here. Not unless there's something real serious behind the scenes. But there he was, sitting on the far side of the block, looking like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. I'd seen all kinds come through these walls. Gang leaders, politicians, even a couple of celebrities, but none of them moved like him. Most of those guys either puff up their chests or pay their way into protection. Not Diddy. He kept his head down, always watching, always listening, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. And that's what made me pay attention. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but I could see it. The fear. You can't fake that, not in here. He had the look of a man who knew trouble was coming, and no amount of money or fame was gonna stop it. I started watching him, not because I wanted anything. Guys like me, we don't cross paths with men like him. But something about the way he carried himself didn't sit right. He'd flinch when the doors clanged shut. He'd scan the room every time someone moved too fast. Always checking his back. Always expecting the worst. And then there were the whispers. Late at night, when the block quieted down, I'd hear him, talking low, like he was trying to keep the words from escaping. Most nights I ignored it. What a man says to himself in the dark is his business. But that night, something pulled me in. I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the tension in the air. But when I caught the name he muttered under his breath, I froze. That name. It doesn't get spoken lightly. Not in here, not anywhere. It's the kind of name that makes people disappear. And the way Diddy said it, like it haunted him. Like no matter how far he ran, it was always right behind him. And in this place, names like that have a way of catching up with you. Whatever Diddy was running from, it wasn't finished. And if the lockdown was any sign, whatever was coming next, it was already too late to stop it. Chapter 2. Whispers in the dark. In prison, information is currency. It moves through the vents, slips between the bars, and travels faster than any guard can catch. And after that night, the night I heard Diddy mutter that name, I knew something big was brewing. The next morning, the lockdown eased up. Doors cracked open, and the block came alive again. Shouts, footsteps, the hum of a place that never really sleeps. But underneath all that noise, there was something else. A feeling. Like everyone knew a storm was coming, but didn't want to say it out loud. I caught a glimpse of Diddy during chow. He sat alone, no entourage, no bodyguards, just him and a plastic tray of half-warm food. Guys like him, they don't usually sit alone. They either pay for protection or end up becoming a target. But no one touched him. No one even looked his way too long. That's how you know a man's problems run deeper than prison politics, when even the killers give him space. I kept my distance but kept watching. And it didn't take long to notice. Diddy wasn't just paranoid. He was preparing for something. Every move he made was calculated. Who he talked to, where he stood, even how he ate. Like he knew any slip-up could be his last. That afternoon, I found myself in the laundry room. One of the few spots where you can talk without every word getting back to the guards. That's where the real stories come out. And that day, the air was thick with rumors. "You hear?" One guy leaned in, voice low. "They brought in the feds last week, off the record." "For him?" Another nodded toward Diddy's cell. "Yeah, and whatever they wanted, it ain't over." Now I've heard my share of prison gossip. Most of it's just noise, but when the feds start poking around quietly, that's when you pay attention. Later that night, back in my cell, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. I wasn't the only one. Even the loudmouths on the block, the ones who usually never shut up, were quieter than usual. Everyone could feel it. Then right after lights out, I heard it again, Diddy's voice. At first it was soft, like he was talking to himself. But as I lay there, the words got clearer. He was rehearsing something, like he was preparing for a conversation he didn't want to have. And then, just before the guards made their rounds, I heard him say it. "They know." He said it like a man who had already been found guilty, like whatever secrets he'd been keeping, they weren't his anymore. And in here, once your secrets slip out, there's no getting them back. Chapter 3. The Silent Visit. In prison, nights are supposed to be quiet. But when a name like Diddy lands behind these walls, things change, fast. Everything about him felt different. From the day he walked in, he moved like a man who still believed he controlled the outside world. But inside? Inside, no one's untouchable. And I knew it was only a matter of time before that truth caught up to him. That night, something shifted. It wasn't just the usual tension that comes after a lockdown. This was heavier, like the whole block was holding its breath. Most guys had already turned in, but I couldn't sleep. When you've done enough time, you learn to trust your instincts, and mine were screaming that something was coming. I lay on my bunk, eyes half closed, listening. At first it was the usual sounds, the low hum of conversations from a few cells down, the distant clang of metal gates opening and closing. But then, there was something else, something off. Footsteps, not the lazy shuffle of a CO making rounds. These were sharper, more deliberate, and they weren't coming from the usual corridor. I slid off my bunk without a sound and crept to the door. Years inside teach you how to move quietly, how to become a shadow. Through the narrow slit, I scanned the tier. At first, nothing. But then I saw them, 3 figures moving in the dark. 2 of them were in black suits. The third wore a guard's uniform, but something about him wasn't right. He didn't carry himself like the regular COs, too stiff, too controlled. These weren't your average prison staff. I've seen feds before, enough to recognize the type. And these 3? They were definitely not here for a welfare check. I tracked them as they stopped outside Diddy's cell. They didn't knock, no words, just a soft buzz as the lock disengaged, and then they slipped inside, smooth, quiet, like ghosts. I stayed by my door, waiting. Time moves differently in prison, especially when you're watching something you shouldn't be. Minutes stretch out like hours, but I kept my focus. Whatever was going on, it wasn't routine. After what felt like an eternity, the door slid open again. Diddy stepped out first, and the moment I saw his face, I knew something had changed. The cockiness he usually wore like a shield, gone. His jaw was tight, eyes distant, like his mind was somewhere far away. Behind him, the two men in suits followed. Their expressions gave nothing away, cold, unreadable. But it was the folder one of them held that made my gut twist, thick, worn, and marked with a red stripe. I've only seen a file like that once before. Years ago, another inmate, big shot on the outside, had a similar visit. A week later, he vanished. No warning, no goodbyes, just gone. And everyone who asked questions, they disappeared too. As the men walked away, Diddy stood frozen in place. For a guy who once seemed untouchable, he looked fragile, like a man who had just realized how small his world had become. Whatever they told him, it wasn't a casual conversation. It was something heavier, something final. When the door to his cell slid shut again, I expected him to move, to pace, or react. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring at the wall, his fists clenched like he was trying to hold himself together. I should have let it go. I should have crawled back into my bunk and forgotten I ever saw anything. But that folder, that look on his face, I couldn't shake it. Something was happening, and I wanted to know what. The next day, the block was buzzing. Guys who never cared about Diddy before suddenly had questions. Why did the feds visit him? What did they want? And why, after that night, did he stop talking? Diddy was a man who always had a word to say. Jokes, stories, a reminder to everyone around him that he was still in charge. But after that visit, the silence coming from his cell was loud enough to make everyone uneasy. By lunchtime, I noticed something else. Diddy didn't eat. He skipped chow completely, sat on his bunk, barely moving. For a man used to having the finest things on the outside, refusing a hot meal in here. That was a sign. He was unraveling fast. And the thing about prison? Weakness doesn't stay hidden for long. By the evening, the sharks were already circling. I caught snippets of conversations in the yard. Some guys figured the feds were trying to flip him, get him to talk about things no one else could. Others thought maybe he was already working with them, cutting deals to save himself. And a few, they were waiting for a slip-up, a reason to strike. I've seen it before. When a man loses his grip, it's only a matter of time before someone takes advantage. And if Diddy had secrets, real secrets, there were plenty of people inside and outside these walls who wanted them buried. But here's the thing. What scared me wasn't the inmates whispering in the corners. It was the silence from Diddy himself. Because a man like that doesn't stay quiet unless he's carrying something too dangerous to say out loud. A week passed and the tension only got worse. The guards were more on edge, more searches, more lockdowns. And every time a new face showed up on the tier, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the day Diddy's secrets finally caught up to him? One night, just after lights out, I heard it again. Those footsteps, same deliberate pace, same quiet authority. This time, though, they weren't going to his cell. They were coming toward mine. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest. The door didn't open, no visit. But as those footsteps faded down the hall, I realized something. Whatever was happening to Diddy, I was already too close. And in a place like this, when you know too much, you either keep quiet or you become the next thing to disappear. And from the look on Diddy's face that night, I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the only one running out of time. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. In prison, the walls talk. Not the kind of noise you hear during the day, the clanking of metal, the shuffle of feet, the low hum of angry men waiting out their time. No, it's the whispers, the quiet ones, the things said after lights out, when the guards aren't paying attention. And ever since that visit, those whispers had one name on their lips: Diddy. I tried to keep my head down, mind my business. But when you've been inside long enough, you learn that curiosity is a dangerous thing. And yet, no matter how much I tried to shake it, something about that visit wouldn't let me go. Something about the way those men moved, the way Diddy shut down, like they'd shown him something he couldn't unsee. And then the next morning, everything changed. It started with a rumor. One of the kitchen guys, young, eager to prove himself, let something slip. He said the night those suits came through, they didn't just visit Diddy. They stopped by the warden's office, too. And when they left, the warden wasn't his usual cold, hard self. He was quiet, pale, like he'd seen a ghost. Now, I don't know much about the outside world anymore, but I know this. When the people in charge get scared, something big is about to go down. By lunchtime, the rumor had spread through the block like wildfire. Some guys said Diddy was cutting deals to walk out early. Others swore the feds were here because of something buried deep in his past, something even his money couldn't hide. And a few, they said it wasn't the feds at all. It was something worse. I kept my ears open, my eyes too. And the more I watched Diddy, the clearer it became. He was losing control. It's hard to explain unless you've been inside. In here, power isn't about muscle or violence. It's about presence. The way a man carries himself. And when Diddy first arrived, he had it. That unshakable confidence. The belief that nothing could touch him. But now he flinched at shadows, avoided eye contact. Even the guards started treating him differently. Less like a celebrity, more like a man waiting for a reckoning. And then, one night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was late, past midnight. The block was quiet, except for the occasional snore or cough. I was lying on my bunk, half asleep, when I heard it. A low, urgent voice from the cell next to mine. Diddy's voice. At first, I thought he was talking to himself. Plenty of guys lose it in here. Solitary thoughts spilling out when no one's around to listen. But as I pressed my ear to the wall, I realized he wasn't alone. There was another voice, quieter, steadier, someone I didn't recognize. "I told you," the other voice said. "They're not done with you." Diddy's reply was sharp. "I didn't talk. I didn't give them nothing." A pause, then that calm voice again. "Doesn't matter. They don't believe you. And if you're lying, they'll find out." I held my breath, straining to catch every word. "They showed me things," Diddy whispered. "Things I didn't think anyone knew." His voice cracked, just a little, but enough. Enough to tell me whatever those men had on him. It was bad. Worse than bad. "They want names," the voice said, "and if you don't give them what they want, you know what happens next." For a long time, there was silence. And then, just as I was about to pull away, I heard Diddy say something that made my stomach twist. "I'd rather die in here," he muttered. "Better that than what's waiting outside." The next morning, everything seemed normal on the surface. But beneath it, something had shifted. Diddy kept his head down during count. No jokes, no wisecracks. When we hit the yard, he stayed close to the fence, like he wanted to be as far from the other inmates as possible. And every so often I'd catch him glancing at the tower, watching, waiting. And then, right before lockup, something else happened. A new guy arrived, quiet, clean cut. Too clean cut for a place like this. He didn't talk much, didn't mingle. But when he passed by Diddy's cell, I caught the briefest glance between them, a flicker of recognition. And Diddy? His whole body tensed, like he'd just seen a ghost. That night I stayed awake. My gut told me something was coming, and in here, your gut's all you've got. A little after 2 in the morning, I heard it. The sound of a cell door sliding open, soft, deliberate. Not the usual CO patrol. This was different. I crept to my door, careful not to make a sound, and what I saw confirmed every bad feeling I'd had since that first visit. The new guy, the clean-cut one, was standing outside Diddy's cell. No cuffs, no guard escort, just standing there, like he owned the place. And Diddy? He was sitting on his bunk, head down, hands clenched into fists. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see it, the way Diddy's shoulders tightened, the way his breath quickened. Whatever the new guy was saying, it wasn't a friendly chat. A few minutes later, the door slid shut again. The new guy walked off, and Diddy just sat there, frozen. And I knew. Whatever was going on, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day, things got worse. Diddy skipped breakfast. He barely moved during rec time. Even the guards seemed uneasy, like they knew something was about to break. By the time lights out rolled around, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the whispers around me, one thought kept circling back. Whatever they had on Diddy, it was big enough to scare even him. And in a place like this, when fear takes hold, the next move is always the most dangerous. I wasn't sure who was pulling the strings, but one thing was clear. Diddy's past wasn't staying buried, and if he didn't give them what they wanted soon, he might not live long enough to see the outside again. Chapter 5. The Unseen Hand. In prison, nothing happens by accident. Every glance, every movement, it's all part of the game. And when someone as powerful as Diddy starts looking over his shoulder, you know the game's about to change. After that late-night visit, everything shifted. Diddy wasn't just paranoid, he was scared. And in here, fear is a scent that spreads fast. By the next morning, the whole block felt different, tighter, meaner, like we were all waiting for a storm that hadn't hit yet. I kept my eyes open, watching Diddy's every move. He skipped breakfast again, which wasn't like him. For a man with his reputation, food was one of the few things he still had control over. But now, he just sat in his cell, staring at the wall, like he was running through every bad decision he'd ever made. By mid-afternoon, the guards called a surprise shakedown. Random cell inspections aren't unusual, but the way they moved through the block that day, it wasn't random. And when they reached Diddy's cell, everything stopped. They went through his stuff like they were looking for something specific, not the usual sweep for shanks or contraband. This was different, more deliberate. And when one of the COs pulled a small folded piece of paper from under his mattress, I knew Diddy was in deeper than anyone realized. The guard held it up, reading it over with a cold expression before slipping it into his pocket. No one said a word, But I saw the look Diddy gave him. Tight-jawed, eyes burning with a rage he couldn't let loose. Not yet. By evening, the block was buzzing. Everyone wanted to know what was on that paper. Some guys swore it was a list, names Diddy was feeding to the people on the outside. Others thought it was leverage, something he was holding on to in case things got worse. But me, I wasn't sure what to believe. What I did know was that someone wanted Diddy backed into a corner. And in this place, when a man has nothing left to lose, that's when he's most dangerous. Later that night, I got my first real clue. It came from a guy everyone called Big O, an old-timer who'd been inside longer than most of us had been alive. He didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. I found him sitting by the laundry room after lights out, working a cigarette down to the filter. "You keeping an eye on your boy?" he asked without looking up. I leaned against the wall. "What do you know?" Big O flicked the cigarette away and stood up slow, his knees popping with the effort. "A man like him don't come in here without ghosts," he said. "And the people looking for him, they ain't gonna stop till they get what they want." I followed him down the hallway, keeping my steps quiet. "What do they want?" He stopped at his cell, turning to face me with a look that made my stomach twist. "They want the truth," he said. "And if he don't give it to them, they'll bury him, inside or out." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Diddy's voice from the other night, those quiet words that had cut deeper than anything else. "I'd rather die in here." And as the hours crawled by, I realized something. If I wanted to survive whatever was coming, I needed to know the truth. The next day, I got my chance. It happened during rec time. Diddy was sitting alone near the fence, keeping his head low, while the rest of the yard buzzed with noise. I waited until the guards were distracted, then slid onto the bench across from him. "You're running out of time," I said quietly. He didn't look up. "Mind your business." I leaned in closer. "I heard what you said the other night. Whatever they've got on you. It's bad, but you're not gonna last in here if you keep playing this game alone." Diddy's hands clenched into fists, but his voice stayed calm. "You think you understand what's going on?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know the half of it." I kept my voice low and steady. "Then tell me. Because if you don't start talking, they're gonna take you apart. Piece by piece." For a moment, I thought he was gonna shut me out. But then he exhaled slow, like the weight he'd been carrying was too heavy to hold anymore. "It's bigger than me," he said quietly. "Bigger than this place. They don't just want names. They want proof. Proof that I was part of something. Something no one's supposed to know about." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "What kind of proof?" Diddy looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time since he arrived, I saw the fear underneath. "Records," he said. "Documents. Things that tie people with real power to things that could destroy them." "And they think you have it?" He nodded. "I had insurance on everybody, always did, but some of it got out." I felt my pulse quicken. That's what they're looking for. Diddy rubbed a hand over his face, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "If they don't find it, they'll make sure I never leave this place alive." The weight of his words hung between us, heavy and suffocating. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, just as I was about to pull back, Diddy said something else, something that froze me in place. "There's someone on the outside," he muttered. "Someone who knows where the rest of it is hidden. And if they get to him before I do..." He shook his head. "It's over." I didn't ask who he meant. I knew better than that. But one thing was clear. Whatever secrets Diddy had buried, They weren't staying buried much longer. And if the people pulling the strings didn't get what they wanted soon, they'd tear this whole place apart to find it. As I stood to walk away, Diddy grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "If you hear anything," he said, "you come to me first." I nodded, but deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever was coming next, no one in here was safe, not even him. And in a place like this, when the walls start closing in, there's only one rule that matters: survive, no matter the cost. Chapter 6. Secrets don't die. In prison, information is currency. It buys protection, favors, sometimes even freedom. But the wrong kind of information, that'll get you killed. And whatever Diddy was sitting on, it was dangerous enough to make men with real power nervous. After that talk in the yard, I knew I was in deeper than I wanted to be. But once you hear something like that, about hidden records, powerful names, you can't unhear it. And in a place where nothing stays secret for long, I wasn't the only one paying attention. The block had a different energy after that. You could feel it in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. Even the COs seemed jumpier, keeping a tighter grip on the routines. And Diddy, he was slipping. Whatever leverage he thought he had, it wasn't working, and someone wanted him to know it. It started small, a broken lock on his cell, his commissary order getting lost 2 weeks in a row. Little things, but in here, the little things mean everything. It was a message, loud and clear. Someone on the inside wanted him rattled. And if there's one thing I knew, it's that a man like Diddy doesn't rattle easy. So when I found the note under my mattress, I knew things were about to get worse. It wasn't much, just a scrap of paper, folded tight. 5 words written in shaky, rushed handwriting. "He's lying. Check the library." I didn't recognize the handwriting, and that was enough to make me nervous. Notes like that, they don't show up by accident. Someone wanted me to find it, and whoever it was, they knew more than they were supposed to. I waited until lights out before making my move. The night shift CO wasn't exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. A pack of smokes kept him busy while I slipped out of my cell and made my way down the corridor. The library was quiet, too quiet. A place like this, there's always some guy burning time, pretending to read. But tonight, it was empty. I moved fast, checking the shelves near the back. Law books, mostly. That's where guys hide things. Between legal briefs no one bothers to read, and sure enough, it didn't take long to find it. A manila envelope, thick, unmarked. Someone had jammed it behind a copy of the federal sentencing guidelines, probably figuring no one dumb enough to land in here would bother looking. I tucked it under my shirt and got out of there before anyone could see me. Back in my cell, I waited for the guard to make his rounds before opening it. What I found inside? It wasn't what I expected. A list, names, dates, bank accounts, some of the names I recognized, big players on the outside, politicians, CEOs. But there were other names too, people I'd never heard of, and next to each one, handwritten notes in the margins, details no one should know, who they paid off, what they covered up, who they silenced. And at the bottom of the list, one name was circled in red ink. Diddy. Whatever game he was playing, it wasn't just about protecting himself. This question mark, this was blackmail on a whole other level. Evidence that could destroy people who thought they were untouchable. And somehow, it had made its way to me. I barely had time to process it before the lights flicked on, shouting, heavy footsteps, a raid. I shoved the envelope under the mattress just as the COs burst in, 6 of them, too many for a routine sweep. And the way they moved, this wasn't about random contraband. They were looking for something. One of them grabbed me, shoved me against the wall. "Where is it?" he growled. I played dumb, but my heart was pounding. Someone had tipped them off. Someone knew I had the list. They tore my cell apart, flipped the mattress, emptied the toilet tank, even checked inside the light fixtures. But when they didn't find it, their frustration turned mean. The biggest CO, big bald guy with a face like a brick, leaned in close. "You think you're smart?" he whispered. "You don't know who you're messing with." They left me bruised but breathing, and the envelope still hidden right where I left it. But the message was clear. Whoever wanted that information wasn't done looking, and if I wasn't careful, I'd be next. The next day, I found Diddy in the yard again. He was pacing by the far wall, keeping his back to the guard tower. When I walked up, he didn't even look at me. "You got people inside," I said quietly. His jaw tensed, but he didn't deny it. "And?" I pulled the envelope from my pocket and held it out. "This is what they're after." He took it, his face hardening as he flipped through the pages. "Where did you get this?" "Library," I said. "Someone left it for me." For a long time, he didn't say anything. When he finally looked up, his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. "You should have burned it," he said. I shook my head. "It's not that simple. Whoever's pulling these strings, they're not gonna stop. You're running out of time." Diddy exhaled, folding the envelope carefully and sliding it into his waistband. "There's a name missing," he said. "The one they really want." I raised an eyebrow. "Who?" His mouth twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. "The man who started it all. The one who built the system I was just playing in." And just like that, I understood. This wasn't just about Diddy covering his tracks. It was about something bigger, older. A machine that had been grinding people up for decades. And now, that machine wanted him gone. "You gonna fight back?" I asked. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Fight back?" He shook his head. "I've been fighting since before you knew my name." But there was something else in his voice, something that sent a chill down my spine. Resignation, like a man who knew the walls were closing in and there was no way out. Before I could say anything else, the yard buzzer sounded. Time was up. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. Whatever secrets Diddy was holding, they weren't going to stay buried. And if those secrets got out, nobody, inside or out, was going to be safe. Not even him, not even me. Chapter 7. The Final Move. In prison, you learn one truth real quick. No one makes it out clean. Not the innocent, not the guilty, and definitely not the powerful. And right now, Diddy, he was holding on to power by a thread. After the raid on my cell, things changed. The guards were watching me closer. My usual routines interrupted. Conversations eavesdropped on. Even the inmates who used to keep their distance were suddenly paying attention. That kind of pressure doesn't come from nowhere. Someone wanted me on edge, and they wanted Diddy broken. For days, he stayed low. No more yard meetings, no more whispered threats. Just silence. And that silence, it was heavy. Something was coming. We all felt it. And when it hit, none of us were ready. It happened during a routine head count. Nothing special, just the usual lineup while the COs did their walkthrough. But when they got to Diddy's cell, everything stopped. His door was wide open. And he was gone. I swear you could feel the air shift. Guys started murmuring. The guards panicked, rushing down the block, barking orders. But there was no sign of him, just an empty cell, and a question no one wanted to ask. How does a man like Diddy disappear from a maximum security prison? They locked us down immediately. Full shakedown, cells flipped, personal property trashed, everything short of strip searches, and me. I knew this wasn't just about a missing inmate. This was the end game, and I was already too deep to back out. Later that night, when the block was dead quiet, I found the second note. This time, it was taped under my sink. Neater handwriting, no rush. 3 words. Boiler room, midnight. I didn't have a choice. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than me now. And if Diddy was still alive, I needed answers. At exactly midnight, I slipped out. The lockdown had most of the guards distracted, but I still had to move carefully. One wrong step, and I'd be doing time, in solitary, or worse. The boiler room was in the oldest part of the prison, damp, dark, the kind of place no one wants to be. I eased the door open, heart pounding in my ears. He was waiting for me. Diddy, but not the version the cameras showed, not the smooth, untouchable mogul. This Diddy? He looked tired, like a man who hadn't slept in days, but his eyes, still sharp, still dangerous. "You took your time," he said, voice low. "I had to be sure," I shot back. "Where the hell did you go?" He let out a dry laugh. "Sometimes, the best place to hide is right under their noses." I didn't have time for riddles. "What's going on? Why are they coming after you?" He reached into his jumpsuit and pulled out a small black notebook. Worn edges, pages dog-eared. Whatever was in it, it wasn't meant to be found. "This," he said, holding it up, "is why they want me gone." I took a step closer. "What's in it?" "Names," he said. "Real names, the kind that don't show up on official records. These are the people who built the system, and the ones who make sure it never changes." I swallowed hard. "And you've been using this to keep yourself safe?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "Safe? Nah. There's no safety when you know this much. But it's leverage, the only thing that's kept me breathing this long." I had to ask, "Why tell me?" He sighed, like the weight of it was too much to carry alone. "Because I need a backup plan. If I go down, someone else needs to know the truth." The notebook felt heavy in my hands, too heavy. "What if I burn it?" I said. His gaze hardened. "You think that'll stop them? This goes deeper than anything you can imagine. They don't just control money. They control people, institutions, the rules we all live by. And if you cross them, they erase you. Simple as that." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I'd seen men disappear before. In here it's easy. But this was something else entirely. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He leaned in close. "When the time comes, you'll know. Just make sure this gets out, no matter the cost." Before I could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the silence. "Go," he whispered. "Now." I slipped out the back just as the door swung open. By the time the COs searched the place, I was already in my bunk, pretending to sleep. The next morning, Diddy was back in his cell. No explanation, no questions. Just like he never left. But something had changed. He wasn't scared anymore. And me? I had that notebook hidden where no one would find it. For the next week, the pressure didn't let up. More searches, more lockdowns. They were hunting for something, but they didn't know I had it. And every night, I wondered if I'd wake up to find my throat cut. Then just like that, it stopped. The warden called an emergency meeting. Word spread fast. Diddy was getting transferred, some supermax facility out of state, and once he left here, no one would hear from him again. When they walked him out in cuffs, he didn't look back, just kept his head high, like a man who knew this was always how it would end. But I knew the truth. He'd left me with the only thing that mattered, the truth behind the lies. And with that notebook in my possession, I held the last piece of his power. The next day, I got a message during mail call. No envelope, no return address. Just another note. One word this time. Soon. I don't know who sent it. Could have been a warning, could have been a promise, but one thing was clear. Whatever Diddy started wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And in a place where secrets can get you killed, I had the biggest one of them all. But here's the thing. Secrets don't stay buried forever. And when the truth finally comes out, a whole lot of powerful people are going to burn.